Welcome back to the Never Iron Anything Comics Review Podcast. This week we have the return of the best spoken man in podcasting, whose Mega City Book Club is going from strength to strength, with guests such as Garth Ennis, John Wagner, Jerry Finley-Day, and many more recently, amongst many enthusiastic readers as well. It's a must listen. It's only Eamonn Clarke. How you doing, man? You right?
All right, Tony. How you doing?
It's because we were just discussing EastEnders meets Doctor Who, isn't it? You got carried away there, haven't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me back.
That's great to have you, man. Thanks for coming back. Yeah, we're doing a morning of recording this today, aren't we? So we're doing this one, and then we're doing one for you, which is going out later in the year.
A Mega City Book Club will be out later in the year about The Light and Darkness War by Cam Kennedy and Tom Veitch.
Because you've been looking for someone, and I've been sitting on my hands around that, because I thought I don't want to monopolise going on. So it would have been like my fourth appearance or something on there, I think, wasn't it? And I don't want to monopolise going on there. And you keep saying it. I keep hearing you saying, "But nobody's put their hand up for that one yet." And I thought, I love that book. I absolutely love it. So yeah, listen out to that one. Feel good.
Okay.
Now I've got you on. I've suggested one to you. Now I'm guessing you're a fan of this area of TV comics and audio plays, as it turns out. But this is, in a weird way, it's something old, but also something topical. Did you want to tell the listeners what we're going to be talking about, dude?
Today, Tony, we are going to be talking about Doctor Who comics, but we're particularly going to focus on a story called Doctor Who and the Star Beast, first published in Doctor Who Weekly in 1980, I believe.
Yeah, and it ran for, is it 8 parts, I think I've got written down here?
Yeah, an 8-part, and I think... Was it still weekly at that point before it turned into Doctor Who Monthly? But anyway, yes, 8-part story, written by Pat Mills, brackets, and John Wagner, although I don't think John Wagner... We'll talk about their writing partnership in a minute.
Yeah, definitely.
And then art and letters by Dave Gibbons, originally in black and white, although it's later coloured for American purposes.
It appears to have been coloured a couple of times, doesn't it? Because later on we got the Marvel put it into their Marvel Premiere, and then it span out, as a lot of comics did from Marvel Premiere, it span out into its own Baxter comic series, which was coloured once then. But I've got in front of me the IDW version, which appears to have been recoloured, I'm going to say. What version have you got there, dude?
So I've been looking at the IDW version, but I've also got the Marvel Premiere stuff. I couldn't find the black and white ones, although they're in a box here somewhere.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Andy Yankas coloured it for the Marvel Doctor Who strip, I think, or Doctor Who comic, I think.
Right.
And then what's the name of the chap who recolours stuff for IDW? Charlie.
I'm just looking now and I can't. Oh, Charlie Kirchhoff.
Charlie Kirchhoff. And I'm going to say that I think. You can see why John Higgins was such a great choice to colour Dave Gibbons on Watchmen, because these strips originally done in black and white, and perhaps not intended to be in colour. Both sort of colouring jobs are a bit not quite right, it seems to me, with Dave Gibbons' art. But we'll perhaps talk about that as we go along.
Yeah, I feel the same, man. Even though when they drew it, when they drew and wrote it and designed it, it was designed as clever as Des always was at the time to transfer to the American market, because they laid it out in that way, didn't they, I think?
Yeah, they did. I mean, as you say, Des Skin and Dave Gibbons, both smart cookies.
Yeah.
They deliberately laid it out in a format that could be easily scaled up or scaled down to a Marvel comic. And then where they had like next week captions and things like that, they had the art underneath it. So the captions could just be literally peeled off, and then they could just stitch it together for Marvel.
Yeah, and it's very noticeable now that he says it. I'm looking at it thinking, oh, I see, yeah, I get you, and it works well. Now, we extra to this episode as well, we've been very kindly forwarded by Pat the Star Beast chapter of Page Turners, Star Beast and his Doctor Who stuff that he did. So we'll be referring to that as well, which is a big shout out to Pat there for that. Now, Mrs. Higgins, there are aliens at the bottom of your garden. So I thought we'd open by talking a bit about your... I didn't realise quite... You hinted at being in the lift at something a minute ago, and I didn't quite realise how much of a... Is Whovian a thing? I don't know. Is that a thing we say?
Whovian's a thing, or certainly that used to be a word for Doctor Who fans.
Is it? I always wonder if it's a bit like Trekkie, they say, oh no, we're not that anymore, or sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. But yeah, you are quite a big Who fan are you?
I'm a big Doctor Who fan, Tony. I wouldn't say, I'm going to state quite quickly that I'm not a Doctor Who expert.
Yeah.
I
Me
can
too.
easily get, mixed up on various bits and pieces. But yeah, I've always been a Doctor Who fan. As regular listeners now, I grew up in the 70s. And so for me, it was John Pertwee.
I was going to ask. Yeah, that was going to be. I was going to say. So, who would have been the companion with Pertwee when you started, or you most remember it?
I remember Joe Grant.
Okay. Yeah.
Katie Manning, and I remember obviously Sarah Jane Smith,
Yeah.
who then of course transfers over to the Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker. And I particularly remember because you get those moments of television that you see as a kid that sort of scare the bejesus out of you.
Yeah.
And certain people will know perhaps what I'm going to talk about, but the autons, the shop window plastic dummies, come into life in a high street shop window and then break in through the window to terrorize a group of people waiting at the bus stop. That I found utterly terrifying as a child, and also a particular John Pertwee Third Doctor sort of villain, the Sea Devils. The Sea Devils walking out of the sea. Which we later find out, of course, as these poor stuntmen inside these terrible rubber costumes who are almost half drowning to do this as the suits fill up with water. But anyway, the Sea Devils walking silently out of the sea. Those are the sort of like the moments I remember that just like absolutely scared the what's-its out of me. Doctor Who, so the Third Doctor, the Fourth Doctor, and then, of course, particularly since the revival in 2005, I've been a big fan, and I've watched it all.
Okay,
since then. Yeah.
I'm going to say Pertwee too, actually, and you're right about those moments that we remember. And I'm in the middle of doing what I'm calling a Tomathon, where I'm watching all of the Tom Bakers. Mostly inspired by reading this comic, to be fair. I just got, we get grabbed by certain things, don't we? We're easily led as comic fans, aren't we? And we just dive into something for ages, don't we? And then move on. But I'm doing that, and I have to say, my first memory of Doctor Who, I've got friends who of my age who claim that the Green Death is their first thing, because that was another one of those very striking, scary things, wasn't it? Like you say, like the shot dummies.
Maggots.
Yeah. And I think those things are not another one slightly off subject, but another BBC serial. The other one was The Survivors, where there's the bloke with rabies. I remember that very distinctly. Memory is sharpened by sharp emotions, isn't it? And fright's a big one, I think. But my first memory of Doctor Who is the spiders jumping on people's backs in Planet of the Spiders in the last Pertwee. Who I liked. I read his book recently, his autobiography, John Pertwee. Read it a couple of weeks ago. A weird turn of events that me and my family never realised is we may be related to him, which I'll bore you with later. But there's a reference in, I think, chapter 3 about a relative of ours. So it's quite an interesting one.
Okay.
Yeah.
But and of course, Wurzel Gummidge.
Wurzel Gummidge, yeah. Why is his son not Doctor Who? That's what I'd also like to ask.
I know.
He'd be great.
Yeah, Sean Pertwee.
Yeah. But for me, I think Tom really. I've got that sort of vague memory of John Pertwee, but then when it was on to Tom, and watching stuff like Genesis, the Daleks, and the Seeds of Doom, and was it the Loch Ness Monster if you read Target books, but it's Terror of the Zygons if you watch the TV series. Stuff like that really, like you say, like the Shopfront Dummies, really brings it back.
There's the arc in space where they're getting taken over by some terrible plant monster, and of course, have you got to that on your Tomathon?
Yeah, I've done that one. Yeah.
So you've seen the sort of bubble wrap monster, which
in HD.
I think that's the problem. I think that's the problem. We watch them now in HD, and we forget how crappy our televisions were in the 1970s, and how when this appeared very briefly on screen at the end of an episode, you're like, bloody hell, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And now you look at it and you're like, oh, it's bubble wrap.
No. I watched that on BritBox or something, I think, which is all sort of quite HD. And I'm thinking, I'm going with it, man. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, I know what you mean. I was watching Horror of Fang Rock this morning, and we were talking a bit off mic about it, and the sort of green balloon that moves slowly up the stairs is the villain in that one. Yeah. I went with it.
Utterly terrifying.
Yeah. Have you got any favourite companions? Who would you say is your sort of go-to companion? Because that's also something that is groundbreaking in this comic, and we're going to talk about that in a minute.
So Sarah Jane Smith was the companion that we were all sort of if you had a girlfriend who went to another school, you wouldn't know her, Tony. It was Sarah. It was going to be Sarah Jane Smith.
Yeah.
Of course, Louise Jameson comes along as Leela later on for sort of like to get all the dads on board.
Yeah.
And for all of us, like, oh, that's very interesting. That's an interesting costume. Sarah Jane Smith. I like Joe Grant, Katie Manning playing Joe Grant.
Yep.
And then
she was sort of heavily patronised at all times, wasn't he? I think he almost like designed the word mansplaining, didn't he? I think at certain points.
For the third Doctor, yes.
Why didn't you go and put the kettle on, Katie? Or Joe. It's a bit like that, wasn't it? I can imagine. Yeah.
Well, it's always been the function of the Doctor's companion is to say, "What's going on, Doctor?" So the Doctor can explain to the audience what's happening. And Joe Grant was great at that, wasn't she? Like, a real early 70s fashion plate.
Oh, yes. Totally, man. Yeah. And she's. I mean, I've got. Was she in the movie Eskimo Nell? I've got a feeling she had sort of brief foray into sort of saucy comedies in the UK as well. I think as well. But she's now doing that Iris Wildtime thing.
Yes,
Big Finish.
Big Finish.
Good fun. I met her at a screening. My best friend from school, Dave, now does special effects on Doctor Who, so I got blagged it with him to go to the screening, and afterwards I got to chat to her, and she was there, and we'd watched the screening of the Daleks. Now, if you know anything about Katie Manning, I'm sure you may know this fact or not, but she has an affinity. She has quite a friendship with Daleks. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
I think I know the pictures you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes,
we're all Doctor Who fans know those pictures. Yeah.
Yes,
and she was. I was chatting to her afterwards. And she was saying, "How?" I said, "Oh, it must be great coming to these screens. How do you feel about the new series?" And she says, "I love the Daleks." And she looked at me, and in my eyes, she knew that I realised, and I knew that she realised that I realised, and we had that just split-second moment where we both smiled at each other, and then we continued on with another conversation. And to be fair, it was the funniest thing ever. And I felt an elbow from my mate Dave in my ribs, saying, "Yep, that just happened." But because we're British, nothing was said, and we moved on. Yeah,
very good. Yeah,
just brilliant. Yeah. God bless her. She was marvellous as well. The nicest of people. I think like Liza Minnelli's best friend or something.
Oh, really? Oh,
strangely.
Okay.
Yeah. Just really interesting character. Right. Good. Okay, so that's the TV bit. We will refer back, I'm sure, to the TV bits as we go along. But I don't think, even though this is a comics podcast, I don't think we could have talked about it without mentioning the TV series. Now, the comics is something I've listened to you talk about on your other podcast, haven't you? You've talked about the history of Doctor Who comics. Not all brilliant, some of them sort of redrawn faces and stuff like that.
So if we talk about Doctor Who comics, and if we bring in the Big Finish audios as well, the Doctor has probably had more adventures in comics and on audio than they've had on screen.
Yeah, I think Tom's on record now by saying Tom Baker on record by saying he's done more Big Finish audios than he did Doctor Who on TV.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And the comics start. You're quite right. British Invaders, my other podcast.
Yeah.
We did a couple of episodes about
great
Doctor
stuff,
Who
man.
comics.
I listened to them this week. Really good.
Oh, good. Thank you. And they go back to 1964, the year after the show starts.
Yeah.
And there's a comic called TV Comic, which did exactly what the name suggested. It just did comic strips of popular TV shows. And so they started a Doctor Who strip in 1964 in that with the first Doctor, William Hartnell. And he had two new grandchildren in that one. He had
that's right. Yeah.
John and Gillian, the sort of never mentioned since grandchildren of the Doctor. And basically it's carried on in various titles. The Doctor Who comics have jumped from title to title over the years. But there's been Doctor Who comics about all the Doctors, basically. And so many adventures. And some of them have really, like if we talk about Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor, who only gets the
TV movie.
Only gets the one TV movie. But he's had a career as the Doctor in comics and on audio that's been huge compared to that single TV movie.
And interestingly, he's been written in audio for Big Finish by Pat Mills.
Yes.
Which are crackers, with Sheridan Smith as his companion. And they're good. They're great, man. Really good. Yeah.
just, you know, Paul McGann as the Eighth Doctor, Sheridan Smith playing his companion on audio, written by Pat Mills.
Yeah.
It's like, sign us up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's a sort of the one in London, in sort of Victorian London, is just, it screams that Hinchcliffe period. You know, it really does feel it. Yeah, really good. Yeah, so I'm going to make a big case in a minute about how good I think this comic is. But how did you get to Doctor Who Weekly? Was it something you were buying at the time, or, I mean, without being rude, you were what, teens?
Older.
Yeah, slightly older than me, aren't you? So teens, I'm guessing, when it came out.
Yeah, so I got. This is where it gets embarrassing, Tony, because this is in one of my gap years.
Ah, right.
This is 1980, and I'm going off to medical school, and therefore I'm thinking myself all serious and grown up and proper like, and I don't read comics anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm having one of my gap years away from comics when this is coming out.
Yeah.
So actually, I didn't get Doctor Who Weekly when it launched, and I didn't read these stories at the time. I went back and got them afterwards, because people would say, "Oh yeah, Pat and John did these stories with Dave Gibbons, and they were great." Yeah, so it's basically that. I missed them at the time, and of course, Doctor Who Weekly and Des Skin and Marvel UK,
and Warrior, and you know, it was really your wheelhouse, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, Warrior's, of course, what gets me back. Warrior's when I go into that newsagent in Leicester. And pick up Warrior and think, you know, which we talked about on this show, the first issue of Warrior, and you're like, bloody hell.
Yeah, absolutely groundbreaking. And American listeners probably don't realise what a bombshell on British comics that was, you know.
Yeah.
Really was. Yeah, but this came slightly before then, didn't it? Des had done House of Hammer before this, and then he moved on to this, I think, hadn't he?
Yes. And I think you've talked about House of Hammer and Brian Lewis's artwork on this podcast.
Who did I do it with? Jason Gunn.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, you know, those are great things. I've got a couple of those in the other room next to the bed, because they've got articles about Quatermass in them.
Yes.
And I've been doing some reading about Quatermass.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so Deskin has done that, and then he thinks because again, as we've said, Deskin is smart. He sees a gap in the market. He thinks, oh, we could do Doctor Who, and we could fill the magazine not just with comic strips, but also with pictures and, you know, production images and articles about the show and stuff like that. And we could turn it into a weekly comic, and that's what he does.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about this on the is it Stripped for Action, which is the documentary you put my way, which I think appeared on a couple of DVD releases, didn't it, in sections? And he talks a bit about that on that one. I'm gonna say I've watched quite a few videos, but he basically came off the back of making things about like House of Hammer, and he said, well, why isn't there a Doctor Who comic? You know, Tom Baker is, I think, one of the series, I think prior to Tom taking over, Web Planet was the most popular episode ever, or the most popular story ever, which seems like a weird one, because I don't know if you've seen Web Planet. It's quite dull.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, I stopped myself yawning as another sort of pantomime horse of an ant comes on. But Tom was like the most popular at that point, and he was saying, well, why isn't there one? So he got together with Dave, who he was already good friends with. I think he'd been Dave's best man at that point. And they put together a dummy version of it. And it included all sorts of things. So they would nick images out of other magazines just to fill up a magazine to show this is what we could do with it. And I think they also used, I think the Mekon was in it for some reason.
Oh, right.
Off the top of my head. Yeah. And he went to Marvel UK and said, look, this is what they do. And they went with it. And issue 1 had a 200,000 print run, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially these days.
These days, yes.
Yeah.
Unheard of.
Yeah. And it was kind of, to me, I think I got bought it by a parent. I think is where it came to me. I was at boarding school, and I think it was Exeat or something like that, and I got bought it in the car for the drive home, you know, from boarding school. And it was kind of the first sophisticated Doctor. We'd had the annuals, I suppose, was the only precursor to that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We'd had the sort of throughout, I think, pretty much the history, some had comic strips in, some had illustrated stories in, some would have puzzles, but this was the first focus thing. So it had a number of comic strips in it, but it also had articles on Doctor Who, which we were all like super hungry for, weren't we? Really, because we loved the series. Yeah. And very cleverly, Des got Pat and John Wagner on board with Dave Gibbons on the art. Who Dave does an awful lot of art on this. You know, there's the Dave Gibbons collection from IDW runs to I think it's almost 400 pages of comics. Right. It's pretty impressive, you know.
And it's because I've also been reading Dave Gibbons' Confabulations autobiography.
So good, isn't it? Isn't it good?
Yeah, it is great. And of course, he talks about this period with Des Skin, because by this stage, I mean, talking about smart cookies, because we know Dave Gibbons he really knows always known what he's doing.
In fact, interesting quick story, just to interrupt. I think this is Dave's version. I think this is Dave's book, because I used to buy a shop at a comic shop, which was Dave's local comic shop, and Dave used to get maybe 4 of one thing, 2 of another, you know, and he used to go and swap his comp copies for store credit, if you see what I mean. Right. And the owner of the shop would give all the sort of big regular customers a present at Christmas, and I got this. So I think this may be Dave's copy.
Ooh,
which is quite cool. yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, man. Yeah.
No, it's all right. I mean, because obviously, Des and Dave Gibbons talk about making the art ready for Marvel reprints in America.
Yes. Yeah.
But also, Des says to Dave Gibbons, "Well, Paul Neary can pencil it and you can ink it, or vice versa." And as ever, Dave Gibbons has always sort of wanted, no, I'll draw it and letter it, and I'll get the 2 checks. You know, well, he's always been very sensible about that. Yeah. And then also, of course, in his autobiography, and of course, we do get slightly different versions of this. But Dave said that Des started going through panel by panel with him and saying, "Well, you could change this, do this," and Dave basically said, "No, Des, I know what I'm doing." You know,
yeah.
Thanks very much, but unless you want me to completely redraw the whole strip, I know what I'm doing. It's fine.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we know Dave. We've met him. We've heard him talk many a time.
Yeah.
And he did know what he was doing. Clearly. And he was also, of course, he had Tom Baker as his artistic source, as it were. So you know, very sort of recognisable character that he could draw. And I mean, it looks great. The covers he did look great.
I suppose we're jumping ahead of ourselves a bit here, but would you be able to give a little summary of because there's a few stories in this little run, and we're concentrating on the Star Beast particularly, because it's going to be one of the specials at the end of the year, and we know that Pat and Dave have certainly been in contact with Bad Wolf Studios and stuff about it. But would you mind just giving a little summary of what it's about, Eamonn?
Okay, so it's a Doctor Who story. Pat Mills and John Wagner are in one of the writing partnerships, but actually the way it worked out, the name that appears first is the one that wrote that particular script.
Which Pat explained to us in that letter, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, Iron Legion, Mills and Wagner, so Pat wrote it. City of the Damned, Wagner and Mills, so John Wagner wrote it. Star Beast, Mills and Wagner, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, we could go off on a tangent, which we won't, about that fascinating period when there was all these little writing partnerships going on. You know, Wagner, Mills, Wagner and Grant. But anyway, so Pat Mills writes it, Dave Gibbons draws it. The story is that an alien spaceship crash lands in the fictional northern town of Blackcastle, which is, you know, the fact it's a northern working class. It's very pat, isn't it, as well?
It's very pat and relevant. There's an alien creature who is known as Beep the Meep, who is discovered in a garden shed by 2 teenagers called Sharon and Fudge.
Great characters, aren't they? We'll get onto them in a minute.
Great stuff.
Yeah, and replicated so well, I thought, in the audio plays by Big Finish. So Big Finish did a series based on these comics because they love them so much, and they get it so right. Especially Fudge, I think. To be fair, Fudge is just that right sort of nerd but rebel kind of thing going on, you know.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And so we got this Beep the Meep, who's this sort of furry, lovable-looking alien creature that the teenagers are charmed by. And then you've got these other aliens, these sort of insectoid, weird-looking monsters who are hunting down this creature. And in the process, they come across the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, at that time in the comics without a companion, so traveling by himself. Although he's got K9, although I think K9 is on the fritz in this. K9 is sort of broken.
Make a comment that his speech patterns sound like Leela or something at one point.
Yes,
is that right?
that's right. Yeah,
but I think this would have been during the Romana period. It was
on TV.
Yeah,
right.
on TV. I'm going to say. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
So basically, you've got that. You've got these two teenagers, this working class northern town. You've got this cute furry alien that they're trying to protect. These insectoid, sort of mechanized, sort of military aliens are hunting Beep the Meep, and in the process are using the Doctor to help get them to the Beep the Meep.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's going to be a great twist along the way in typical Pat fashion.
Yeah, I think we can give it away. Yeah.
Well, the twist, obviously, is that Beep the Meep is not the cute, cuddly, lovable alien. Beep the Meep is a genocidal maniac. I think we learn his race has been corrupted by black sun radiation.
That's right.
There's a Doctor Who thing that is completely made up by the sounds of it. And so they've turned into genocidal murderers who
fluffballs.
Fluffballs. Beep the Meep is the worst of them, and the insectoid aliens who are hunting them, of course, are the good guys, although they don't look or sound like the good guys, and they do have a slight tendency to just blow people away who get in their way.
Plant bombs in the Doctor's stomach at one point.
That's right. There's a bomb in the Doctor's stomach, which I had to reread this morning just to check that they did. Pat remembered at the end of the story to take the bomb out. So it's all going to lead to sort of some very dramatic situations, which the Doctor will manage as ever to get everybody out of, and it will all lead to a happy ending. And it will also lead to this character Sharon, this black teenager from a sort of working class northern background, will become the Doctor's companion for a while in the comic strips, which is
a long time before
remarkable.
Martha. Yeah, a long time before we had Martha come along, who I also thought was fucking one of the best companions and should have lasted more than one season. I've got to
yes,
but
treated badly.
Yeah, I think so. The also there's a strange. Sharon's really good in this, but they sort of age her. If you read like a year on in the comics, she grows up, doesn't she? She's involved in some kind of time thing, and she grows up. Strange one that I didn't figure that out, and that was after Pat and John had left. I think it was Steve Moore was on it then.
Yeah, I don't know if they felt, uncomfortable with the Doctor traveling with a teenage schoolgirl, and so they do a story called The Time Witch, and in that she gets time dilated, aged. I don't know. She gets Doctor Who technobabble, so she grows up. But she remains his companion. And I know she does come back she gets referred to in comic strips later on for other Doctors, as a companion of the Doctor. And of course, as you say, she's been now played in the Big Finish audios based on these stories by Pat and Dave.
Yeah, must be brilliant. Yeah. I'm so pleased for them. Before we get onto my big theory, so Beep the Meep is... It's almost become a catchphrase, Beep the Meep, isn't it? Of Doctor Who fans and Doctor Who comics fans, I think.
Yes.
It's a kind of you know if you say it at a convention, if you see what I mean. You're in the know.
Yeah.
And but it's based on Pat's Abyssinian guinea pig, which he had when he was a kid. It's class. I love that. And Pat even includes a mention in this chapter he sent us about how it died. Because he found out he was told at the time because he was feeding it too much lettuce, but he's since looked that up, and that's probably not true. Which is just, I just love these little asides by Pat. They're just brilliant. Yeah.
And I'd also like, because obviously, we're big fans of Pat, and we know that he and John had submitted script ideas to the TV series,
yes.
and in fact, some of these stories that appeared in print were probably rejected ideas. I mean, if we briefly mention the Iron Legion, which has like a world where the Roman Empire has persisted and is now got robot legionaries and
genuinely some of Dave's best work, I think.
Wonderful artwork.
Yeah.
But of course, you can get away with saying to Dave Gibbons, "Can you draw me a robotic Roman army that's got
Yeah.
thousands?" Whereas doing it on TV, they would have had to have had one guy come in to a room and say, "Oh, the others are all outside."
It's only 3 costumes.
Yes,
yeah.
that's right,
It's like famously the BBC only had 4 Daleks for about 20 years, didn't they? I think or something.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And again, talking about Beep the Meep, one of the things all Doctor Who fans know is about how in the original William Hartnell's, some of the Daleks are actually cardboard cutouts.
Yeah.
But Pat, loves to reverse things. So he quite rightly. This is a very Pat thing as well. He quite rightly looks at Doctor Who and says, well, it's a bit middle class and white.
Yeah.
Why don't we make it a bit more gritty, northern, working class, and have a black companion? And he also sees the thing. He said, well, there's this really cute, cuddly, fluffy alien. Everybody loves it. Everybody sort of like thinks it's wonderful. Why not make that be the bad guy?
Yeah.
And it works perfectly.
I think Pat says something about, I can't remember who said this to me, or he wrote it in an email, is politicians sometimes are handsome, smiley people, aren't they? But, some of the worst politicians in our time have been like good-looking, smiley blokes, and they're behind their backs planning like massive wars. You know, it's like, and Pat's very much on that, I think, which I like. Yeah. Speaking of Beep, there's, you were mentioning earlier about, there's episodes of Doctor Who we remember, the sea delves coming out of the sea and stuff like that. The one abiding, I think because I was of an age, I think I was 11 or something when I read this, the 11 or 12, the moment where Beep the Meek seems to produce a gun from his tummy hole. Yes. I remember that just sticking in my mind for ages. I don't know why. Where did that come from?
It's the big villain reveal in a way, isn't it? It's had this gun concealed in this sort of weird pouch that it's got. Because there's a little bit of the kangaroo in there as well, I guess.
Yeah, I guess.
And suddenly produces a gun and starts shooting people, and then telling Sharon it's all right, they're not dead, they're just sleeping. It's a stun gun or something like that.
And he keeps the BS up to the end, doesn't he? Claiming it's just someone who looks like me. It's my twin or something like that. He tries every single thing to get out of it. Yeah. It's interesting as well. You talk about that, giving it that gritty feel. Pat also told us that he was working on Grange Hill comic at the time. I didn't realise he'd written Grange Hill comic. I mean, the amount of times we chatted, but and that's got that feel about it too. That early Grange Hill stuff, which a lot of listeners won't remember, but was in its way also groundbreaking in how it dealt with certain specific subjects and stuff.
Yeah. And of course, the fact that at this time in British comics, there is only Pat Mills, John Wagner, and Alan Grant.
To seem to be, don't they? Yeah.
There's this chap called Alan Moore who's starting to appear, but it was mostly Pat and John, wasn't it?
Yeah. Pat uses the phrase which I liked, which is stereotypes always need challenging. Which I think is a great question to ask yourself when writing a comic, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's you can see that Pat would love that, and quite right too, Yeah. And that he does it before, the TV show ever did.
Yeah.
It won't be until 2005 onwards when we start to get, I suppose you could say, Ace. With the Seventh Doctor,
fake street, wasn't she?
Yes, she was street. That's right. But then we get Rose in 2005.
Yeah,
and you really get this idea of the Doctor's found a working class companion, and
I think it's Eccleston who says what somebody said to him. Why do you sound northern? And he said because there's a north in space.
Yes.
Okay.
Lots of planets have a north.
That's it. Yeah, easily explained. Yeah. I mean, I love. Especially classic Who, I love it. I'm just mad about it and have been for years. But I was watching The Deadly Assassin the other day, and it occurred to me by the end of about episode 3 that there are no women in this series. There's literally no women in 4 episodes. Yeah, you think, okay.
Isn't The Deadly Assassin when Mary Whitehouse particularly complained about this? The
I knew there was a reason for it.
Yes. But she complains that the cliffhanger was
he gets drowned,
Doctor being drowned at the end of one episode. And then at the start of the next episode, he's all right because, of course, it's Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And that she particularly complained about that.
No, of all the things. There's literally the villain is rotting flesh wandering around in a hood. She doesn't like the fact that has she not seen any television? The Yeah, I watched Face of Evil the other day, and it just all the savages in that looked like blokes who'd just done a co-star thing on the Sweeney or something,
Right.
and they'd probably just come back from the pub on a light and bitter, but and then they strapped these things on to make themselves look like, you know, the tribe of the Sever team, and I'm like, really? Okay, fair enough. BBC studio, off to the BBC bar afterward, lads. You know, it was a bit like that. Yeah, but yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, so Pat's sent us some stuff, but there's also some stuff we read about and we watched about Dave as well. Now, Dave has said he's been on record saying he wasn't really a huge Doctor Who fan. For him, Doctor Who was William Hartnell, and he hadn't watched the show when he was asked to draw it, although he was drawing Dan Dare at the time. So I'm guessing that was the 2000 AD Dan Dare. You know.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. Dave Gibbons got less and less interested in Doctor Who with each successive Doctor, didn't he?
Yeah.
He was a William Hartnell chap, and then like Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, Tom Baker, he thought he was less impressed with each one in turn.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we get to that famous story that you and I have heard him tell at many a convention, I can imagine, about when he had to draw the fifth Doctor, Peter Davison, and some of the problems that caused.
Oh, right. I might have heard this. Would you repeat it? I can't.
Okay, basically, as you say, Dave Gibbons does Doctor Who for quite a while before he gets basically, picked up by the Americans and goes over to Green Lantern comics and draw the comics he'd already wanted to do. Yeah. And we know where that goes. So he deals with the transition on the television from Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor, to Peter Davison, the fifth Doctor. He's drawing Peter Davison, and he said the problem was that Peter Davison had a sort of conventionally handsome face with no distinguishing features, whereas Tom Baker has got the nose, the teeth, the hair, the double chin. He's got easy, and you stick a scarf around him, and he's easily recognisable. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, that's Tom Baker."
Yeah.
And apparently it was Peter Davison's agent who said, "You're making my client look terrible in the comics."
Oh, really? Okay.
And so they sort of, and I think, is it Alan Mackenzie was sort of editor or sub-editor at the time, right. I think, or Alan Mackenzie basically brokered a deal between Doctor Who Monthly, as it was then, and the TV series. And the deal was that they got some studio time with Peter Davison to take lots of reference photos because it wasn't quite, in those days, it wasn't as easy to have a library of images of the person you were trying to recreate. So they do this photo shoot with Peter Davison, basically, and Dave Gibbons goes along and they take loads of photos.
Oh, wow.
And Dave Gibbons was able to improve the likeness in the comics and presumably keep the agent happy.
Right. That's interesting. Because I know in the front of the IDW book, he says he didn't meet Tom till 2010.
Yes.
Which is cool.
Yes, there's a picture of him with the holding up the Iron Legion book with Tom, and Dave's caption that says, I think this is in Confabulations as well.
Right.
Dave's caption that says, "Here's me with Tom Baker. He had no idea who I was."
I remember that. Yeah, go out and get Confabulation if you haven't already, listeners. It's just brilliant. It's just it's less an autobiography and more sort of an art book with anecdotes. And if anyone's ever seen Dave talk, he gives great anecdotes, doesn't he? Yeah. The thing him and Pat talk about is the level of collaboration as well. And I think Des mentions this in one of the documentaries I watched as well, in that it wasn't just a script. It was pictures, things cut out of newspapers. There's a face at the start of the Iron Legion, I think, of the shopkeeper screaming they've arrived or they're here or something, in a close-up. And that was, I think, was an actual photograph they'd found in the newspaper or stuff. So it was almost like an illustrated story by the time it got to the point of being drawn, I think. They talk very fondly of how much it, and I mean, Pat speaks very fondly, as does Dave in Confabulation of Pat, but I seem to think they got on really well. Their 2000 AD work together was, the Robuster stuff was just incredibly good, as a pairing.
There's that shopkeeper's face, and then, of course, in the Starbeast story, there is Mrs. Higgins, the housewife. And Mrs. Higgins, who looks like Hilda Ogden from Coronation Street, and has a fag hanging out of her mouth. And the fourth Doctor gets to say to her, "There's aliens at the bottom of your garden, Mrs. Higgins."
Yes.
And she has got that sort of the Hilda Ogden hair done up in a sort of strange turban and the sort of floral housecoat apron thing. And Pat talked about that with Dave and saying, we wanted we wanted to do something from Coronation Street that, that's what, to a certain extent, stereotypical housewives wore in those days.
Yeah, and they had shopping trolleys, didn't they, and stuff like
yeah,
that.
exactly. The tartan shopping trolley, the floral house coat, and the weird hair turban that kept your hair up while you were doing the housework. Yeah.
Cool. The other thing is worth talking about is Dave's drawing in it. I mean, it's superlative. It really is. But there's a couple of moments in it, and I thought, oh, okay, because he does actually admit that he got the drawing of K9 slightly wrong. He said he drew him too small or something. I think a couple of times he said, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he admitted he got the scale slightly wrong on K9. But I mean, his aliens, his spaceships, the ship crashing on
so good.
On Black Castle at the start, which I think was the image that you sort of WhatsApped to me and said, should we talk about this?
Right, okay.
All of that stuff. The Wrath warriors, who are the alien sort of insectoid warriors that are chasing.
Great, aren't they?
They're great. They're fantastic.
And when the tide turns and the Doctor begins to realise, Doctor and Fudge begin to realise that they're okay, one of my favourite images in all Doctor Who comics is them sitting around the table having biscuits and tea with them.
Yeah.
Just genius.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also that they get on a double-decker bus.
Oh, mate, if I was on your podcast and you said what page would you want, it would be that one.
Right.
When they get on the bus. Or they're trying to get on the bus and you've got the bus conductor standing there looking at them going, what is going on here? Yeah. Jasper Carrot's on that as well. Have you read that bit?
Yes, apparently there's Jasper Carrot's on the upper deck.
So I think he had a bit where he'd go on about he doesn't like people sitting next to him on the bus. Classic British comedy.
He had a classic bit about when the nutter gets on the bus, does the nutter always sit next to you? And then,
that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. I remember that now. Actually,
that's another reference for the kids. Jasper Carrot. Yeah,
yeah. I remember his daughter's an actress, isn't she? Or as an aside, she's the lady who works on reception in the British office. And someone on
right, okay. Yes, that's right. She is. Yes, and she plays.
Oh, is it Dawn? Is that right?
She's Dawn in The Office, and she's Etta Candy in the first Wonder Woman movie.
Oh, right, okay. Because I remember someone said to her once, "Why isn't your surname Why isn't your surname Carrot?" And she says, "What makes you think that's a real name?" Which made me laugh once. So my let's talk a little bit about the audio play before we go into this. So. Star Beast is part of a Big Finish collection of stories they've done, the Iron Legion and Star Beast in there. There's some great interviews in there as well with the cast where Pat and Dave are discussed. I know you listened to it yesterday, didn't you? I was texting you and you said you listened to it at the time, but you had listened to it before. How does it compare, do you think?
I think they do a great job. I know, because we talked about this on British Invaders, I know that with the script, because you've got an 8-part comic strip, and that doesn't equate to the, what is it? How long do they want them to be? An hour and a half, 2 hours that they need for Big Finish. Yeah. So I know they had to do an awful lot of expanding of it and filling it out, as it were. But I know that they, as you say, they involved Pat and Dave Gibbons. They give them full credits. They do this story. They did the Iron Legion story. You get somebody, you get somebody playing Sharon and Fudge, obviously. So they, you actually get actors playing these companions, and it's just great. Big Finish again, a bit like comic books. You can really push out the special effects without having to worry too much about the budget. And so it's great, I mean, Big
I really
Finish.
enjoyed it. I love Big Finish. I can't put Big Finish on if I'm like sitting on the couch or laying on the bed or something. I'll go to sleep. But if I'm in the car, that's when I've got to listen to these audio plays because they really make the time go. And that was a great one. Having Tom in it as well is just brilliant, isn't it? Having Tom talk the lines, so good.
And I mean, is Tom Baker in his 90s now?
Yeah, I think he is,
He was probably in his late 80s when he did those. And yet he still manages to sound exactly like it's 1979, it's tea time on a Saturday, and, here's Doctor Who. And he just sounds like he is the Doctor, isn't he?
Yeah, he really is, man. He is so good. I mean, he was the Doctor for 7 years, so he was the Doctor for the longest. He is the Doctor... I was watching my missus the other day, and she watches the new one with me because my bud Dave works on it and stuff, and she says, "No, still nobody's been as good as him."
No.
I think she's right.
This was because of course Doctor Who Weekly is in part response to the huge Doctor Who mania that was happening in the late 1970s because of Tom Baker, and because of the stories they were giving him as well. The stories, the companions, the other actors, the monsters and everything. But Tom Baker was like a phenomenon. It's not until we get to David Tennant,
I was going to say, man,
that we get close to that, is it?
I was going to say now. I actually have a theory around that, and I think I've kind of had it pretty much confirmed recently. But the reason I think they're bringing Tennant back is because there's been a little slippage in interest. I think it's inevitable, a program that's on for so long, and they want a bit of a lift of it. And Tennant was the most beloved of the new era. I think he's the Tom of the new era to me, almost.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And when David Tennant took over from Christopher Eccleston, the new Doctor Who just went up another level and became a global phenomenon again. And yes, I think you can see why they're bringing David Tennant back for these. I can't remember, is it 3 or 4 specials that we're going to get?
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. This is definitely one of them. And as I understand it, it's been it's going to have to have been, isn't it? It's been rewritten.
Yes,
because Donna Noble's back in it, isn't she? So
Donna Noble's back, who actually is my favourite of the new companions.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool.
And so that we know, because basically, as you say, if you say beat the meat to people, and of course when the trailers started appearing for the David Tennant specials that are appearing later this year, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Then all the Doctor Who fans started tweeting and WhatsApping "beep the meep." There's "beep the meep."
Yeah, it's exactly right. It'll become. I hope it doesn't reach sort of Pokemon levels of craziness, if you see what I'm saying. But it's become a thing. And I checked on eBay. Funny enough, from what you were saying there, I checked on eBay for these issues, and they're anything up to about £155 at the moment.
Oh, blimey! Okay.
So so you and I, let's sell ours and head to Marbella for a couple of weeks. We'll be fine. Yeah.
And to keep referring back to previous episodes, if we sell our Mighty World of Marvels with was it, the first appearance of Betsy Braddock?
Yeah,
we'll do all right. Okay, all right. Yeah,
be millionaires. You'll be able to tile your in and out driveway. That is what I've entitled this episode.
Yeah.
So I've got high hopes for the Christmas special. I like Tennant. I like Noble. I like the fact that they've had to kind of, Russell T Davies has talked a bit about this, isn't he? He's had to go with this because it's a smaller scale thing, but it's a good Doctor Who story, isn't it? It's like, I just watched, like I said, I watched Horror of Fang Rock the last couple of days, and that's basically in 4 rooms. Yeah, but it holds your attention still.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very exciting. They've done it on Big Finish Audio, and now they're doing it on TV with David Tennant and Catherine Tate. And can't wait. Actually, can't wait. Very excited about it.
Me too.
And there is, you're quite right. They've played smart. They've brought back David Tennant. They surprised everybody. You wouldn't have thought you could still do surprises. Yeah. Because I think we were all expecting Jodie Whittaker to regenerate into Ncuti Gatwa.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And that the David Tennant was going to be a sort of multi-doctor part story or something like,
like a 5 Doctors kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, she regenerated into, spoilers, David Tennant, who is now the 10th and the 14th Doctors, and Ncuti Gatwa will be the 15th Doctor. Yeah. So tremendously exciting. Beep the Meep is in the trailer. Looks great. We believe, you're because you're friends with Pat, we know that Pat and Dave were
treated well.
Let's say that. Yeah.
With the respect they're due for that story, I've got to say. Yeah, completely.
Well, one of the recurring themes of both Never Iron Anything and the Mega City Book Club is treating creators properly for the stuff they create, even if it's just was created for what was thought to be a throwaway medium that would just be like, this will be 8 weeks and then it's gone. It will be forgotten. But, treat creators well. And we've always been in favour of that.
Yeah, everyone from, Jack Kirby through to Pat, through to people now,
Exactly.
The thing is, you're creating this story, you're coming up with stuff, and then big companies, multinational companies are reaping billions out of it. And you got some dude who, can't afford healthcare or something in, I don't know, San Francisco or something, and you think, come on, guys. Yeah, I agree, man, totally. Right, which leads me to my drawing to guest projects. But before we finish, I thought I'd ask you this. So I think this run is the greatest Doctor Who comics have ever been. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't think I've ever read a Doctor Who comic that's better than this. I would just caveat and say that I'm a big fan of a story called Black Legacy, which is not a Doctor story. It's a Cyberman story that appeared as a backup. And it's by, get this, Alan Moore and David Lloyd.
Okay. Well, I was going to say the other one possible was also the Cyberman one by Mick McMahon, which the name has escaped me now. Junkyard Demon. Yeah.
Right. Yes, there you go. But yeah, no, I mean, Pat Mills and John Wagner writing, Dave Gibbons doing superlative Dave Gibbons art, knowing exactly what he's doing at all times. Yeah, this is the pinnacle of Doctor Who comics. And it does, particularly with Pat's stuff, it does interesting things that,
progressive, isn't it, in a way?
Yeah. Pat has ever been progressive. I don't want to be a downer on John Wagner. I will say that the next episode is written by John Wagner, and it's Space Truckers, and you think, oh yes, John,
back on teletext,
Space Truck. Yeah. You love truckers and space lingo. I mean, there's werewolves, so that's good.
That is, and they look great. The other one I liked was is it Dragon's Claws?
Yes, Dragon's Claws,
which does have a reference in, I think it's one of the Eccleston stories where they have the Kung Fu monks.
Yeah.
At the start, which is a clear reference to that, I think. As soon as I saw it, I thought, that's Dragon's Claws. That's the Dave Gibbons book,
Well, the interesting thing, of course, we know that Russell T Davies, who brought back Doctor Who in 2005 and is doing the specials, this year, we know he's a huge comic book fan, and we know that he's read these comics as well.
Yeah.
We also know that he sort of is at least partly responsible for saving Big Finish, because, when the BBC were bringing it back and they said, we don't want any audio adventures coming out, and Russell T Davies said, oh no, Big Finish is safe.
That's good. Yeah, yes. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is absolutely the pinnacle of Doctor Who comics. Russell T Davies is a big fan. We're big fans. I'll just mention a couple of resources, if I may, Tony.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, please do.
You've mentioned briefly Stripped for Action, which was a series of videos that they included as extras on Doctor Who DVDs.
Yeah.
But you can go to, I think it's now, for some reason it's not on YouTube, but you can go to Vimeo and watch all of them.
Yeah, you sent me the link, didn't you? That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do an episode for each Doctor and the comic strips that, were done about that Doctor. And you've got, as you said, you've got interviews with Des Skin, with Dave Gibbons, with Alan Barnes, with Gary Russell, people like that. So that's great stuff. Stripped for Action. Look for those.
Yeah, that's good. It's really good, actually. Yeah, really impressive. Yeah. They grab all the right people in to do the interviews as well. Very, very impressive.
And there's a website called alteredvistas.co.uk, which I think has stopped now, sadly. I don't think he's still updating it, but it's a complete
it's great.
Comic strip index of all the Doctor Who stories on there. And it's a great resource if you're just looking at it. And you just look at it and you say, oh my goodness, there are so many Doctor Who comics.
Yeah. That's a really good site, which you also put me into. I have to say, if you've got a Spotify account, you can find a lot of the early Big Finish. This one isn't on there yet, but I think I'm guessing what they're doing is they're putting some of the earlier stories, Big Finish, onto Spotify, so you can listen to them without having, because the CDs can be a bit pricey to buy, but there's a lot on there. There's also some Blake Seven on there and stuff like that as well. And the earlier ones have a lot of actors who've sadly since passed away, like Nicholas Courtney's on a couple, for example.
Yes.
I love Nicholas
Courtney.
The
Brigadier.
Yeah. I was actually quite sad when they sort of left the series. I quite liked them.
Yeah.
I
mean, we do love all the old Doctor Who actors, the ones that still turn up. I mean, your friend Katie Mannion was in the recent. She was in the last story. She was in Jodie Whittaker's last story, wasn't she?
I think that's right. Tegan was in it, wasn't she, as well?
Yeah, and of course William Russell, who played Ian in the very first.
Man, how old is he?
Yes, I know. I met him at a convention as well. He was delightful.
I met Paul Darrow at a convention once, and I said, could you sign this CD for me? And he went, who do you want me to make it out to? And I went, me. And he went, no, should I just sign it Tom Baker? I said, if you want, Paul. And he did. God bless him. Yeah. I think, Tom, they do have Big Finish little cons, don't they, which they have some comic stuff at as well. And I know I've met Tom at a couple of them.
We figured out that we were probably, before we knew each other, Tony, we were probably both at the same Big Finish day where Tom Baker was there.
Yeah.
And Caroline Munro, another favourite of this parish.
A couple of the Babylon 5 actresses. Claudia Christian was there, I think.
Claudia Christian and I can't remember the name of the other lady. Yes.
Yeah.
I bought Claudia Christian's terrible DVD, Star Hike.
Did you send me that? Or you sent me something about that?
I sent you some of that, yeah. Tried to get rid of it. But yes, we met Tom Baker there.
Yeah.
And somehow I don't know what I was talking to him about, but he found out I was a doctor. And, he said, "Oh, you're the doctor." And I said, No, I'm a doctor. You are the doctor.
Oh, class. Yeah. I remember
Then he wrote my name as Emma, so
that's right. That's right. Brilliant. I remember you telling me that. Yeah, I mean, once in the street, we were in Maidstone working, and we were sitting in our cars waiting for something, and he sort of wandered through, and bloke I'm with went, "Oh, there's Tom Baker." So we just went out and said hello to him. I think he might have been a bit pissed. I'll be honest with you. God bless him. I wish I was, but there you go. Yeah.
Tom Baker tells that lovely story. And I've heard him tell him a couple of times, and I think it's probably true, about the bloke who came up to him in the street and said, "You're Tom Baker, you were the doctor." And he says, "Yes, that's right." And the bloke said that he was in a children's home.
That's
and
right.
That the only good thing, the only thing that made the week bearable was Saturday evening tea time when they all got to watch Doctor Who. And he said, "You made it good."
Yeah.
And Tom Baker goes to thank this guy, and the guy is obviously so emotional that he can't, and it's a lovely story.
Yeah.
Because they were, it was a great moment and a great time in British TV.
Oh, man, so good.
When Tom was the Saturday tea time doctor. Can't beat it.
Yeah, we used to rush back from rugby games and stuff to watch it in the boarding house. Yes, the big thing. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, and we didn't really have videotapes back then, did we? You would never find it again. Rarely did they.
No, you'd never see it again. Yeah. And if you didn't get the comic, you wouldn't see it.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. That was a great choice. Thanks. I'm glad I found out that you were such a Whovian. That I don't think I quite realised, but that's great, man, as well. I wasn't going to say you were a Patrick Troughton kid, but who can say?
Not quite that old, but no. Yeah.
So let's talk about your project. So, Mega City Book Club's moving from strength to strength, man. At the moment. You seem to be. I know I rib you about it, but at one point you were like almost weekly, weren't you, with it? Because I know you try to be sort of every other week, don't you?
Yeah, it's normally fortnightly. Usually what happens is at least once a year I get a glut of episodes, and then I go for a while. I might go weekly for a while just to get through them, particularly if I've got sort of bonus episodes where, say, Conrad and I are doing some films that we've been to see. I might put that out.
And I felt completely the same about you two about Guardians. I'm so glad. I'd seen it that morning that I listened to it, and I thought they nailed it. How I felt about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we've done that. But yeah, at the moment, Mega City Book Club comes out every other week, and it is much like this podcast. A guest chooses a book, hopefully British comics related, and we talk about it and share the love of the comic, basically. And as you say, luckily, recently I've had John Wagner on, I've had Garth Ennis on. I managed to briefly interview Jerry Finley-Day.
Yeah, that was great, man. Yeah, you've had John on a couple of times. It was 2 weeks running, I think you had him on almost, wasn't it?
I managed to get him on 2 weeks running because I spoke to him at the Enniskillen Comic Fest in Northern Ireland, which I managed to get
about the Bogeyman, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right, about the Bogeyman Kickstarter. We had him the previous week at Lawless. But yeah, I mean, at the moment, the most recent episode is also from this parish, Richard Sheaf, the Don of British Comics.
The Don. Yeah.
Talking about the work of Frank Bellamy. And,
I'm saving that for Tuesday. I'm really looking forward to that. He's the dude who knows about it. I once got led around an exhibition, I think it was Lawless, by the Don, telling me and Vince all about the art, and it's like brilliant. It's talk about a mine of information. Yeah. He is fantastic. So that's out at the moment. Then we've got more episodes coming up about Judge Dredd comics in the next couple of weeks. Cool.
We've got the Shimura Japanese Judges comics coming up. What else have I got coming up? Oh, yeah, Sonic the Comic. That's interesting.
Okay. Do you know there's a lot of fans of that comic? I keep hearing the people saying it's like a formative comic for them,
Huge thing, Sonic the Comic. Huge.
Yeah.
Not our generation, Tony.
Yeah.
But somebody got to meet up with this chap, Dan, in a pub in Cambridge, and he told me all about Sonic the Comic. And that was fantastic. So that's coming up. And we've got a chap called Damien who's done Garth Ennis's extremely dark, crossed comics, the sort of
Yes.
post-apocalyptic.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan
Right.
because he goes there with it. I think there's
He
more.
really goes for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's more in 6 issues of that than you get in like 4 trades of Walking Dead sometimes. I think. Yeah. Okay, cool. Garth's great. He's also a regular now, and I like the fact that Garth doesn't come on to talk about himself. He comes to talk on about comics he loves. Ain't that great? Yeah.
So Garth Ennis obviously is a huge fan of Battle and Action and 2000 AD, particularly Battle, and he loves talking about Battle stuff. And he does come on. He's been on twice now, and he's going to come back next year and do a comic called The Sarge from Battle.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, you're quite right. He doesn't really want to talk about his stuff. He wants to talk about Battle and late 1970s British comics. And of course, you and I were all right with that. We're quite happy with that.
I'm more than happy with that. We actually have a running gauge on the ACP. Is we have some guests on and we gauge them about whether they talk about other comics as well. Yeah, that's one of our little things. Some people are just completely on transmit, aren't they? They need to receive a little bit sometimes, I think. Yeah. Oh, good stuff, man. You got any other projects? So we got DUI 3 is on the bubble at the moment, isn't it? So it's almost there.
It's very close, actually.
Yeah.
We're now, this is July. DUI 3, the third issue of an anthology comic produced by the Awesome Comics podcast community to raise money for charity. That will be out in August.
Yep.
And it will be on sale. And if you're listening to Never On Anything or the Awesome Comic podcast, you'll hear when it's out, and you'll get all the links to DUIcomic.blog. I'll start that again. DUIcomic.bigcartel.com, where you can buy issue 2 and issue 3.
Yep.
So that'll be out soon. That's got some lovely work in it, some great creators. It's gone up by 4 pages again on the last one.
Good.
It keeps getting larger each time as we try to fit everything in.
Yeah, because I know we're in you, me, Vince, and Dan are in a little group talking about just putting the final touches to some lettering and stuff like that. So I'm guessing you're almost there, man. Yeah.
Almost there, very nearly there. DUI Comic, and that's raising money this time for Mind, a mental health charity. Very good cause.
Voted. We had a little vote, didn't we, about which charities? Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, that's good for me.
Creators voted for it, and there is a sort of mindfulness theme to at least some of the comics, which is really nice. And it's very much, it's a very much a comic about just the joy of creating stuff. Creativity.
Nobody's
expression.
Getting paid. We're all doing
Nobody's
it
getting
for the fun
paid.
Of it.
Yeah. The money will go to charity. So that'll be out. Mega City Book Club continues. Big British Invaders, the podcast about British television and science fiction, continues.
Yeah, good stuff, man.
Every 2 weeks. We've just done an episode about the 70th anniversary of Quatermass on television. And we'll also soon be talking about Thunderbirds at the movies, which I'm very excited about.
Okay. Yeah.
That's all my other little projects at the moment.
Good. Now that you're retired, you've got to keep yourself busy, haven't you?
Got to keep myself busy, yeah. And I'm hoping next year to get to a couple of sort of bucket list conventions. I'm hoping to get to Angoulême.
I was literally just talking to Chad from Amsterdam this morning about he's going to be there. So, yeah, I'm hopefully going to be there. So it'll be lovely to see you there, man. You'll get invited to the most riotous dinner ever.
Lovely.
Which is just, I'm still laughing about now, which me and Chad sat there. Me and this dude who writes a comic book about dealing drugs, sat there amongst these French guys going, he kept saying, Tony, what's happening? I don't know what's happening. It's just the greatest time. Yeah. What a place, man. It'll blow your mind. Yeah, totally.
Right.
What other ones are you thinking of? Any other ones? Or
New York Comic Con I'm going to try to get to next year as well, I think.
Yeah.
I'd like to go to an American convention.
If nothing else, it's great to meet the creators and see the artwork. The rest is guff, man. You'll be fine with it. But the rest, to hold an Eisner page, you're like, wow. Yeah. Good stuff, man. Excellent. Thanks for that, dude. I really appreciate that. That was a really fun one. I really like that.
Good.
It set me off in all kind of different directions, reading and watching. And I just bought the book on Target novels.
You see, we haven't even got to that. The novelizations of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
It's a massive thing.
Is a thing. Comics is a huge thing. Yeah.
Recreations of the missing episodes. I watched a documentary on that this week.
The missing episode animations and stuff, and the ones they used to do before the animations, where they would stitch together production photos with the audio. The fact that people were taking the backs off their parents' television to wire tape recorders into the audio to record Doctor Who stories in the 1960s.
On 2-inch tape and stuff like that, you know.
What were you doing?
Saying that, I do have a couple of tapes of Superman the movie and a couple of others, which you can just hear my parents rattling on in the background that I've kept for years, you know. Agfa, you know, C90s or something, you know. It's,
nice.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. And, we'll speak soon.
Okay, what about your stuff?
Oh, me? Usual stuff for me, man. You know, it's rattling on. We got... we just had Dirty Basement 2 out. Seems to have gone down quite well, so we quite like that. I met with Mr. Falp this week, so we're talking about doing a third one, so that was quite fun. We got in Underground Comics Creators, the new sort of wave of them in the UK, and we did like a profit sharing scheme so that everyone got paid, apart from me. Everyone got paid on that one, so that was quite fun. Hidden Lives 2, so the third book from that series of comics I'm doing is written now. I'm about to send it out to the artists, so I'm quite pleased about how that's come out. And we're pitching to a mainstream comic this week or next week, so I'll tell you about that off tape. But lovely, interesting. Yeah,
neverownanything.com.
Thank you, mate. Cheers. And where can we find you? Where can we find you online?
megacitybookclub.com. You'll find all the links there.
Cool. Nice one. Are you on that Blue Sky thing or anything like that yet?
No, you haven't sent me an invite yet, Tony.
Don't get invites, do I? I'm not Mr. Social Media, am I? Let's face it.
I'm on Threads.
Are you on that? Are you?
Threads. Yeah.
I thought that was that TV series about the nuclear destruction of London, or whatever it was.
That's the most scary movie you will ever watch. Threads. Yeah, the most terrifying thing you'll ever watch. It should be forced viewing for
now on Blu-ray.
All politicians.
It should be. Yeah, it should be. God. Yeah, I remember that making me shit my pants as a kid, because we'd have lessons at school, wouldn't we? How to make a bomb shelter in case there's a nuclear bomb goes off, and we're showing that on the television. I'm watching Survivors. I'm thinking the world's going to shit. It's not going to end, end well.
I know.
Yeah, but it ended right. Good. All right, mate. And I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers,
Cheers, mate.